Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this oversight hearing on the TSA. This is the first TSA hearing the committee's held since November of 2011 and the first opportunity to hear from Administrator Pistol since he provided a classified briefing on aviation threats to committee members last February. Last week, a public opinion survey released by Harris Poll found that only half of respondents thought that TSA security screening procedures make air traffic safer. Air travel, I should say. Given this measure of public skepticism, which may reflect the fact that we thankfully haven't experienced another 9/11 style attack, I hope the Administrator can explain how his recent efforts to implement a risk-based approach to transportation security at the agency make it more efficient and effective at fulfilling its mission of securing the nation's transportation systems. I know Administrator Pistol has made this intelligence-driven approach a top priority and has brought his former law enforcement experience to bear in the process. So I look forward to hearing about TSA's progress in implementing and expanding the risk-based pre-check program, which I was pleased to hear has recently become easier for South Dakotans to participate in after 2 pre-check enrollment centers opened in Rapid City and Pierre. At the same time, there have been a number of recent security breaches in the news that have raised concerns about TSA's ability to oversee and regulate airport security beyond the screening of passengers and baggage. Last November, an individual entered a Los Angeles International Airport terminal and shot a bystander and 3 TSA employees, one of whom, Gerardo Hernandez, tragically died from his injuries. And just last week, a teenage stowaway scaled an airport perimeter fence, climbed into an airplane wheel well, and somehow survived a flight from San Jose to Maui, Hawaii. Although TSA and FBI investigators have yet to release further details on how he evaded detection by the airport's multi-layered security system, I hope the Administrator can discuss generally the TSA's role in overseeing airport perimeter security and access controls and how we all might learn from these 2 incidents. Technology is one tool that TSA uses to mitigate threats, but the agency's history of technology acquisition is spotty at best. From the failed deployment of unreliable puffer machines to the recent removal of those advanced imaging technology machines that could not be modified to replace detailed images of passengers with more generic images and automated threat detection software. Industry stakeholders have also criticized TSA for making it difficult for industry to plan ahead and invest in innovative research and development. Legislation to improve transparency and accountability in technology acquisition spending by TSA cleared the House unanimously last December. This legislation and a companion bill introduced by our colleague Senator Ayotte and co-sponsored by Senator Blunt have been referred to this committee, and I hope the Administrator can comment on these bills and ongoing acquisition challenges. Mr. Chairman, as we consider TSA's use of its resources, I also want to note my concerns about recent increases to the passenger aviation security fee adopted under the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013. This act, which was drafted without authorizing committee input, raises the passenger fee on July 1st to $5.60 per passenger per one-way flight and diverts $12.6 billion of the total fees generated over the next 10 years to deficit reduction rather than to aviation security. While I certainly support deficit reduction, I do not think that the air traveling public should be singled out to pay for it. In addition, commercial airlines have expressed concerns about TSA's implementation of the increased fee, specifically the elimination of the one-way trip cap and the resulting cost increases for long, multi-leg, round-trip travel. I look forward to hearing clarification from the Administrator on exactly how the TSA will implement this fee change. I'm also looking forward to discussing the efforts that TSA is undertaking in the surface transportation and maritime sectors. One TSA program that's come under increased scrutiny recently is the Transportation Worker Identification Credential, or TWIC program that was referenced by Senator Warner earlier. Recent reports from the Government Accountability Office have raised serious questions about the effectiveness of this program, and I would like to hear Administrator Pistol's suggestions on how the TWIC program can be improved. I'm also interested in hearing the Administrator's plans for TSA to carry out its mission as the lead federal agency for all transportation security matters, regardless of mode. I know that in response to the recent shooting at LAX, TSA has reduced the percentage of Viper teams assigned to surface transportation security from 70% to 50%, and I would like to know whether the Administrator thinks the reduction will have any negative consequences. Mr. Chairman, again, I want to thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you to Administrator Pistol for being here today, and I look forward to his testimony and the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I call now upon Chairman Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like you and Senator Boxer and Mr. Pistol.
Senator, member?
I have a TWIC question. You heard Senator Warner's statement about the problems with TWIC, specifically whether the background checks are robust enough and are refreshed often enough to identify those who represent a threat to our transportation infrastructure, and I'm just wondering how you would respond to that critique.
No, I agree with Senator Warner that the tragedy at the Norfolk Navy Yard was very unfortunate. I think there is still some or some uncertainty as to the facts, whether the shooter actually displayed the TWIC card to gain access, which we know a TWIC card does not grant access to a naval base. It grants access to ports. And I would defer to the Navy in terms of their investigation as to whether he actually displayed that card. That being said, in terms of the background, we have been working on some of the legal aspects of what we are authorized to consider, both from a policy standpoint but also from a statutory standpoint. So I look forward to working with the committee and trying to tighten up some of those gaps, which I believe were identified as a result of this tragic shooting.
Are we routinely checking TWIC holders against relevant criminal and counterterrorism databases to mitigate the risk that these people are getting access to sensitive locations?
We do as to the terrorism database, so if somebody is a TWIC card holder and they are placed on a terrorism watch list by another agency, then that information is pushed to us and we're made aware of that, and then we take steps to revoke that TWIC card, for example. If it's a criminal arrest or something, as Senator Warner testified, that is not pushed to us, and that's one of those gaps. So we know that about a third of all the TWIC card holders do have criminal histories, but that's acceptable under the statute. And so that's something, I mean, these are dock workers, these are port workers in large part, but that criminal history is not, or that updated information not pushed to us. So it's only done at the issuance of the card and then on a reissuance, say 5 years later. So that's something that would be beneficial in terms of buying down risk to say if somebody had been not necessarily arrested, but at least convicted, particularly of a felony, particularly a violent felony, that we should get that information so we can take appropriate action similar to the terrorist watch list.
Okay. As I noted in my opening statement, the bipartisan budget agreement of 2013, which again I would add is drafted without authorizing committee input, increased the TSA passenger security fee from $2.50 per enplanement with a cap of $5 per one-way trip to a flat $5.60 per one-way trip beginning July 1 of this year. And we, of course, hear general complaints about the increased cost of travel, but we've been hearing concerns regarding TSA's implementation of the Act, and specifically that a multi-leg round-trip itinerary could be subject to much higher fees than even the statutory increase would seem to indicate. And it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in response to industry inquiries, TSA suggested that a single round trip with 5 or 6 legs could be treated as 5 or 6 one-way trips. And so you could generate roughly $30 in fees, even though the previous $5 cap per one-way trip would have limited those total fees to $10. And I'm just curious if that's accurate.
That's not my understanding. Obviously, our lawyers have been working on this. My understanding is it's $5.60 per one-way, and as long as that one-way trip is not interrupted by more than 4 hours in a transiting airport, then it's still considered one-way. So let's say you flew from Dulles to O'Hare to LAX. As long as O'Hare is less than 4 hours, Dulles to LAX is still one-way, and that's $5.60. Now, the round-trip portion, did you want to go into that? So that,
yeah.
So on the round trip, we have not taken the position that that existing $10 cap applies, because that's not what the Bipartisan Budget Act said. It doesn't address the cap. And so we're just reading the statute and saying it's $5.60 one way, so it's $5.60 the other way, so that's $11.20 rather than 10.
So you're not, there's no departure from the precedent as to what constitutes a one-way trip today?
There's a different, the statute is different. The existing talks about emplanement, and I think there's been some discussion about that, but as I outlined, that's my understanding, and I'll take that back with our lawyers to make sure that's consistent.
If you would, that'd be great, because it sounds like what TSA is proposing is to treat each emplanement as a one-way trip. And whereas previously it was recognized that a one-way trip could include several emplanements.
That's correct.
Okay, well, you could read that new law then as simply replacing the $5 cap per one-way trip,
right,
with a $5.60 cap per one-way trip, which would still be a significant increase for people who have only been paying $2.50 for a one-way trip with a single emplanement.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'd maybe like to, if you could get some clarification to us on exactly how you intend to implement that, because we are hearing some, obviously, some
Okay.
concerns about that. I see my time's expired, Mr. Chairman, so I'll turn it over back to you and let some other people ask questions.
Good.